right, thank you. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a project that's really become a passion project over the last 5 or 6 years of mine. And it's about Sport Rivalry Man, and I'm going to talk to you today about how we use superheroes and comics to teach about group behavior. But first, I wanted to start off with Happy Cardigan Day. This is World Kindness Day and Cardigan Day in honor of Fred Rogers. And this is a quote I find very helpful from Fred Rogers. The world is not always a kind place. That's something all children learn for themselves, whether we want them to or not. But it's something they really need our help to understand. And whenever you think of Fred Rogers and you think of what he did, it's very, very powerful. And if you want, there's a movie coming out here in another couple weeks about kind of his legacy. And it's just, when I look at him and what he's done, I think, hey, if everyone just did one more thing that we've learned from his TV shows, we would be a better place, right? So the genesis of my research, I research sport fans to understand more about myself. That's kind of what people say. You research what you like, you research what you want to understand, right? So I like to tell a story when I start in my marketing classes talking about fan behavior, and I like to use examples of fans behaving kind of in extraordinary ways, right? Yelling at TVs or yelling at a game or being embarrassed by their actions or something. And then I like to share with the students that all those examples are actually me. So I study this so I could figure out what's going on with me. Why am I behaving this way? And the reason I started researching rivalry in particular is I graduated from the University of Texas. And in 2008, that was the first year that I was living in Colorado working on my Ph.D. And they played Oklahoma that year in their annual rivalry game. They beat Oklahoma. And later in the year, lost to Texas Tech. Oklahoma goes on to beat Texas Tech for the Big 12 championship. And it comes down to who's going to play in the championship game. And Oklahoma beats out Texas by about, I think, 0.02 of a point or something. And what was the BCS standings at that time. They end up playing Florida in the national championship game. And I remember watching that game thinking, I have no affiliation and no affinity to the University of Florida. The only attachment I have to the state of Florida is I'm a Disney fan. Other than that, I really don't care what Florida does, but I don't want Oklahoma to win. And then it dawned on me that I thought, it's not necessary. If I feel this way, other people probably feel this way as well. That, and through interviews, that's where I kind of realized that, yes, I'm not alone, thank goodness. Other people feel this way, and that's where I stumbled across things like Schadenfreude, and we identified glory out of reflective failure, and we looked at how group membership really impacts and influences the way you treat not only your group members, but the group members of an out group as well. And then a quick story, when I was here at the University of Memphis back in 2011, doing my interview for here, I was giving my research presentation, and at the end, through a series of question and answers, I made the statement, Auburn had just won the national championship game of football, and I made the statement, hey, do you think an Alabama fan is really, truly excited that Auburn just won the national championship game? Someone from in the back raises their hand and said, no, you got it all wrong. SEC fans support SEC fans, hands down. 2 weeks later, everybody know Harvey Updike? 2 weeks later, this man, an avid Alabama fan, poisons the trees at Toomer's Corner on Auburn University campus. So this is but one of hundreds of examples of how group membership can drive people to do some pretty negative things toward their out-group members. So then, where did Sport Rivalry Man come from? It actually comes from a class that I started teaching about 5 years ago on rivalry and group membership in sport. And I use Jeff and Jeffrey here. They are identical images of each other, copy and paste from each other. The only difference is they're different colors, and one shirt says my team, yay, the other shirt says their team. And I do that to show people we are the same. Just because you're wearing a different shirt doesn't mean that you are significantly different from someone else or set apart from someone else. And we did this to try to show that, look, within sport, if it's just a shirt that can make a person feel differently because of the groups they belong in, then it can occur outside of sport as well. To try to teach the lesson that what we're learning here about group behavior applies outside of the sports setting as well. And it ends with Jeff or Jeffrey becomes Sport Rivalry Man. So at the end of the class, we talk about, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had somebody teach these lessons? And then Jeff and Jeffrey become Sport Rivalry Man. So that's the very first image of Sport Rivalry Man that we used. And then I actually had somebody start drawing some early concepts of Sport Rivalry Man. So here's one. Here's kind of a more Indiana Jones type feel of Sport Rivalry Man. And then the final version that we use right now, or most currently, is this up here. You know, he kind of looks kind of like he wore a cape because I couldn't think of any other way to make him look like a superhero, right? I guess the first thing that came to my mind was Superman. And so at that same time, when I first got here at the university, I started sportrivalry.com, which was basically a way to teach about history of rivalries and get at that important aspect of, look, it's the teams that we follow, therefore it's the groups that we belong with that cause us to feel like we're different from someone else. It's not necessarily underlying differences that exist, it's what we believe based on our group membership. So we started after we developed Sport Rivalry Man, we started with comics of historical rivalries. So we had some on, here's one on Texas, Oklahoma, talking about the history of Texas and Oklahoma. Here's one about Harvard and Yale, the oldest rivalry in college athletics in the United States. And then here's one about Michigan, Ohio State. And in these, we would tell little stories, little quick stories about the history of them and why they're so intense. And then here at the bottom, if you were looking at this in a blown up version, you would see there's kind of a moral to the story, or at the end, we're explaining something about rivalry. So we're explaining things like schadenfreude, or we're explaining things about in-group bias. What is in-group bias? All of these things that hopefully would help readers see, okay, here's why I actually feel that this group is different from me. It's not necessarily because possibly they are different from me. It's my perception. And then from there, we started creating what we call Adventures with Sport Rivalry Man. And these are stories where we actually put the reader in different situations where the characters in the stories have to decide how they're going to behave towards before someone else in another group. So we started off with something like online bullying, a big problem with our youth, a big problem now with pretty much anyone in our society. And so we would tell these stories about, this one in particular is a Boston fan getting picked on by two of her school friends who are New York Yankees fans, and then her talking about how that made her feel, and then the next day her friends deciding or being explained, or having to explain to them that isn't the right way to treat your friend, and them apologizing. And then we would always end these stories with morals. Basically, hey, just because somebody wears a different shirt than you doesn't mean that they're different. Just because somebody likes a different team than you doesn't mean that they're any less of a person than you are. One thing we did with these is early on, we had Sport Rivalry Man be kind of the Jiminy Cricket character, if you will. So he was the one who would fly in particular in this story, he's the one who would tell the kids how to behave, or tell the participants how to behave. Over the last few years, we've made the decision to let's put more of the onus on the kids, and let's put more of the decision-making power into the kids' hands. So in the second one, the pep rally, where the kids, there's a coach talking bad about the rival team, and kids decide, hey, we have friends who like that team, and it's okay to cheer for our team, but we shouldn't be talking so bad about them. They decide to leave, and they get their parents to leave. There's another one where the kids a kid meets his favorite coach, but the coach has said something negatively publicly, so he talks to the coach about it. And so Sport Rivalry Man kind of then existed in the background. He was just the storyteller. Kids are now the ones making the decisions. That's for a very particular reason, because we were developing a curriculum that was used and can be used in public schools or anywhere to teach about what rivalry is and what in-group bias is. And I had a master's student or a graduate student at the time who was doing her master's degree in educational counseling. So she developed the curriculum, and she actually worked on it and tried some of it in her schools that she was working in. And so the objectives were to teach kids about in-group bias and provide them with examples of appropriate ways to behave. The overall goals of these comics and of this curriculum was that kids are really good at taking things out of one context and putting it into another, right? You don't believe me? Ask your, if you have nieces or nephews, or you have children of your own, you probably have seen that on more than one occasion. They are really good at taking a lesson from one context to another. So the hope is they could take these lessons that, yeah, just because someone's wearing different colors than me doesn't mean they're different from me or they're less than me, and they can take that out of the sports setting and they can put it to other settings in their lives. And then an overall goal, what if the student became the teacher? Could you imagine if that kid can take that out of that setting and then actually tell their adults, their parents, how to behave? How great would that be? So then what's next? So right now what we're looking at is we have a group of students working off of a grant where we're actually working on creating a video for community youth about how to use this curriculum, where people could go in and they could show this video, and the kids can then receive, we have funding where kids can now receive the comic books, and they can receive handouts of Sport Rivalry Man to have lessons that they can take home and reminders that they can take home in their everyday lives. And so we talked about the kids taking more of an active role in decisions. So another thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create an origin story for this. We're in comics, right? And comic books have an origin story. And if you couldn't tell, Sport Rivalry Man was created from a picture. Somebody created him using a picture of myself. And so I started thinking, if I am what Sport Rivalry Man represents, then it needs to be a true story. And so I can't be the Superman type person. I need to actually tell the story that happened. So the origin story would be something of kids essentially teaching me how to behave and teaching me how to treat people outside of the group. And then another thing is we get rid of the cape, because I'll take Edna Mode's advice and no capes, right? They're bad things. Also, it goes back to that Superman comic of you get rid of the cape, then you're no longer associated with kind of that perfect person, perfect example. You can be a real life example and talk about how we struggle with this. Even though I study it, we still struggle with it, right? Everybody does, if you think about it. And so I want to give special thanks to these people who worked. There's a lot of people who worked on these. Most of these are students who've worked on various projects here and there. And so thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.